And welcome everybody to our Fields and Features segment. A lot of interesting stuff going on here, including the subsiding of a geomagnetic storm for an extended period, large sunspots, coronal mass ejections, and more. Let's get to it. Here's the magnetohydrodynamic pressure around Earth's geospace, and that should be the last 4 hours. This is our geospace magnetosphere movie showing magnetohydrodynamic pressure. And we're seeing an elevated pressure here. We may see it subside slightly here at the end. Let's let that play all the way through in one run. We show it daily on the daily space weather videos. Again, geomagnetic storm and unrest conditions continuing on for extended periods over the past 24 hours. We'll show you more about that momentarily. There's the last 4 hours of magnetic pressure. Magnetohydrodynamic pressure, I should say. Here are Earth's ground magnetic perturbations, changes to Earth's B field. Ground geospace magnetic perturbations, Earth's magnetic moment from the ground. And make sure you follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/smashomash. Should be some great auroral imagery there. Let's let this one play through all the way through since it refreshed as well. It's refreshing for data sets that refresh. So yeah, a little re-intensification there and then a little de-intensification as the coronal hole wind stream is about to subside, I would think. Here's the GOES magnetometer over the past 3 days. And you can see those extremely sawtooth readings there. That is the coronal hole high-speed wind stream showing up. And next, let's take a look at the heliospheric current sheet. We expected there to be a North Pole current sheet here by today, and that looks like it's been canceled there. So Earth remaining in a South Pole current sheet shown here in red. A little bit of a surprise. It makes me think Sunspot 2962, which is this one up here in the northeast, is going to grow over the next 24 hours. So here's the line of sight view as solar cycle 25 progresses and looks nothing at all like a grand solar minimum. Way too much activity for it to be a grand solar minimum. It just doesn't have the features of one. Here's the line of sight coronal hole plot. We've got some additional South Pole oriented coronal holes here rotating in. Not showing up super well yet on the SDO imagery. Let's take a look at that. We can expect to see some more well-defined coronal holes around this area. Keep in mind, folks, the solar corona is very bumpy. So if you have a hole underneath all that plasma, you will not be able to see the hole until it's more earthly facing. And let's move on to sunspots. So we've got 5 named groups at the moment. We've got 2957 and ahead of it 2961. North of it in the northern hemisphere we've got 2958. Down here we've got this huge 2960 and 2962, which we are forecasting to grow in the next 24 hours. It's been flaring a bit. And so yeah, 5 groups. Likelihood of significant solar flares still quite high, especially with 2960 and 2962. Let's take a look at it in 1700 angstroms. There's the full disk view. And we're going to show close-ups of 3 different areas here. Starting with 2957 and 2961. There are those regions. You're going to see 61 sort of reform and then re-evaporate. It might lose its name here. But in any case, there's 2957 and 2961. We've slowed this down by 33%. to show the evolution of those two sunspot groups. Next, we'll look at 2962. Again, I think this one's going to grow based on the magnetic data that we see. That Gong 2 data has great predictive value. And here's 2960. It's just gigantic. That leading umbra much larger than the Earth. And it's got quite complex magnetic fields associated with it. It's certainly capable of producing large solar flares. We've got lots more to cover here. Let's blast through a lot more information, since there are coronal mass ejections to cover as well. So here we see several C-class intensifications since yesterday. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Looks like 7 flares since yesterday. None of those have resulted in proton events. And let's go to the real-time solar wind. Current conditions are about 520 kilometers per second for the solar wind speed. Solar wind speed did rise as we forecasted yesterday. What we didn't see is a drop-off in the solar wind density, so that was kind of odd. But in any case, about 13.3 protons per cubic centimeter is the current solar wind density. Here's the 30-minute auroral forecast. Again, it looks like we saw quite a bit of aurora likely to have occurred last night. Once again, yet another reason you should be on Twitter, because, well, it's a great place to exchange auroral imagery. And we share it regularly thanks to everybody who posts it on Twitter. Twitter.com/smashomash is where to follow us to see all kinds of posts from us on Twitter. So here you can see an extended period of geomagnetic unrest and geomagnetic storm there, making it up to a KP5. It was somewhat forecasted yesterday. It was certainly forecasted by us yesterday, not by NOAA. We're hoping SpaceX didn't destroy any more Starlink satellites by not watching our videos. Next, the solar system. This is where things are currently located. Keep in mind, this is not to scale. There is a to scale view. It's not as good for the creation of these videos. We're going to show you the forecast for the next week. Here's where things will be on the 13th of March. And here's a star chart. What's going on above my head looks like this. That's the stellar situation over at Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania. Mars and Venus here showing up side by side. Also Saturn and Mercury rising ahead of the Sun. If you're up before dawn, you may have a great view of that planetary pileup. Next, we've got some coronal mass ejections to show, so here's the view from the LASCO C2 and the Stereo A coronagraph. Stereo A over here on your left. From Stereo A's perspective, Earth would be off to your right, and from the LASCO C2, the Earth would be directly behind you. And we see some coronal mass ejections here. So, interestingly, this one right here had some very interesting features. So, directing your attention to this left pane here, you can see this like bubble-like region forming right here. And then a bunch of that plasma appears to have recollapsed. So some of that ejected, I'm going to say I don't think it's earthly directed. It looks like it'll miss Earth to the north to me. And if we view that same event over here on the LASCO C2, it's very interesting. You can see it looks like liquid. And it looks like a lot of that plasma ended up back in the corona, or perhaps down on the chromosphere, but much of it did not eject. Also, there's a far side coronal mass ejection on the opposite side of the Sun that's happening as we make the video. which may make it look a little bit more like this is directed toward the Earth. But from as far as I can tell, it certainly does not appear like it's directed toward the Earth. So that is our added in-depth analysis. Consider becoming a member of the Smash Team if you enjoy the content and prefer to see it remain publicly visible and free for all to view. Thanks for tuning in. Congratulations on realizing the channel exists, and may that solar wind be at your back.